All right, welcome everybody. Welcome back to my live, guys. I am here with the neon names once again. Everybody, drop your names in the comments, guys. Let's get started. Welcome to my live. How are you all doing today? I hope you're having a good day today. Everybody, please drop your names in the comments, hit that subscribe button, like the live, and drop a name in the comment, everybody. All right, guys, let's start, everybody. Welcome in, guys. All right, first we have is John in the chat. How are you, John? Thank you so much for subscribing, John. Here is your name, and it is done. Who's next, everybody? Welcome to my live, guys. Hi, Lago. How are you? Here you go, Lago. Your name is done. All right, who do we have next, everybody? Please hit that subscribe button, like the live, and get your glowing names done. All right, who do we have next, everybody? Thank you so much for liking. All right, next name, everybody. Who's the next subscriber, guys? Drop your names in the comments. We are doing glowing names for my subscribers. Hi, Lola. Thank you so much for subscribing. Who's the next subscriber, everybody? Dave, sure. This is for your father, Dave. Here you go. All right, next we've got is Chase in the chat. How are you, Chase? And then my next subscriber we've got is Ara in the chat. Here you go, Ara. Next subscriber that I have is Tyson in the chat. Thank you, Tyson. All right, the next subscriber we've got is Arianda. How are you, Arianda? And then the next subscriber we have is Dylan in the chat. Thank you, Dylan, for subscribing. Everybody hit that subscribe button, guys. All right, let me do this to the subscriber mode. Everybody, welcome to my live. Everybody hit that subscribe button and drop a name. Hi, Philip, how are you? All right, next subscriber we have is Rail in the chat. Here you go, Rail. And then who's the next subscriber, everybody? Welcome to my live. We are doing the glowing neon names for you all. So please subscribe and drop a name in the chat. Who do we have after Rail in the chat? Everybody, welcome to my live. Hi, John in the chat. How are you, John? Here you go. Then we've got Tallulah. How are you, dear Tallulah? Thank you so much for subscribing. And then the next subscriber we have is Stanley. How are you, dear Stanley? Who do we have next, everybody? And then the next name we have is, who's that? Everybody, welcome to my live. Miller in the chat, all right? Here you go. Thank you so much for subscribing. All right, next, who do we have, guys? Welcome in. Please drop your names in the comments, guys. We are doing the neon names. Again, everybody, get your glowing names, guys. Hit that subscribe button and get your names, guys. Yeah, you are, Stanley. I hope you like it. Have an amazing day. Hi, Sade. Thank you so much for subscribing, Sade. Here you go. All right, who do we have next, everybody? You're welcome, Stanley. Next we have is Adeline. How are you, Adeline? Thank you for subscribing, Adeline. Next we've got is Kinley. All right, here you go for Kinley. And then the next subscriber we have is Ayan in the chat. How are you, Ayan? And then the next subscriber we have is Kate in the chat. How are you, dear Kate? Have a nice day. And then we have is Aya in the chat. How are you, Aya? And then the next subscriber we have is Brayden. How are you, dear Brayden? And then the next subscriber we've got is Tato in the chat. Here you go, Tato. All right, let's get to the next line, everybody. Next name we have is Amy in the chat. How are you, Amy? And then we have is Ali in the chat. Thank you for subscribing, Ali. Then next we've got is Paloma. Thank you for subscribing, Paloma. And then my next subscriber we have is Farid. Here you go, Farid. And then my next subscriber we have is Aman in the chat. Here you go, Aman. And then the next subscriber I have is Nure in the chat. Here you go, Nure. And then the next subscriber we've got Amna in the chat. Here you go, Amna. And then the next subscriber is Journey in the chat. Thank you, Journey, for subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Amber in the chat. Here you go, Amber. And then my next subscriber is Jack in the chat. Thank you, Jack. And then my next subscriber is Charlotte in the chat. Thank you, Charlotte. And then my next subscriber is Stacy in the chat. Thank you, Stacy, for liking and subscribing. And then my next subscriber is John in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Mishka in the chat. Thank you, Mishka. And then my next subscriber is Chema in the chat. Here you go, Chema. And then my next subscriber is Husna in the chat. Here you go, Husna. And then my next subscriber is Levy in the chat. Thank you, Levy. And then my next subscriber is Eliza in the chat. Here you go, Eliza. And then my next subscriber is Disha in the chat. Thank you, Disha. And then my next subscriber is Shabnim in the chat. Thank you, Shabnim. And then my next subscriber is, who is that? Disha. Disha is your name's here. Then we've got Caleb in the chat. Thank you, Caleb. And then my next subscriber is Caillou in the chat. Let's get to the next line. Then we have is, thank you, you're the best too, Stanley. Who do we have, guys? Kat in the chat. Here you go, Kat. And then my next subscriber is Zoe in the chat. Thank you, Zoe. And then my next subscriber is Sam in the chat. Thank you, Sam. And then the next subscriber I have is, who's that? Hasna in the chat. Here you go, Hasna. And then the next subscriber that I have is Zoe in the chat. Thank you, Zoe. And then the next subscriber, we've got Angel in the chat. Thank you, Angel. And then my next subscriber is Brittany. Thank you, Stanley. And then the next subscriber is Irva in the chat. How are you, Irva? And then my next subscriber is Jaslyn in the chat. Here you go, Jaslyn. And then my next subscriber is Mia in the chat. Thank you, Mia. And then my next subscriber we have is, who is that? Isabella. All right, here you go, Isabella. Thank you. Thank you, Stanley. And then my next subscriber is Grace in the chat. Thank you, Grace. And then my next subscriber is Aslam in the chat. Thank you, Aslam. And then my next subscriber is Chano. And then my next subscriber is Luna. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing, Luna. And then we have is Lily as my new subscriber. And then who do we have next, everybody? Hi, Tracy. Here you go, Tracy. And then my next subscriber is V. Farrell Mons in the chat. Here you go, Farrell Mons. And then the next subscriber we have is Jacob in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Honey in the chat. And then my next subscriber we have is Hene in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Sarah in the chat. And then my next subscriber we have is Rose in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Lisa in the chat. Thank you, Lisa. Then we have is Hassanaf in the chat. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Katie in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Emerald in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Ava in the chat. Thank you, Ava. And then my next subscriber is Chelsea. And then my next subscriber, we've got Ruby in the chat. After Ruby, my subscriber is Poppy in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Charlie in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Manib in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Misan in the chat. Thank you, Misan. And then my next subscriber is Brayden in the chat. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Joanna in the chat. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Cameron in the chat. Thank you, Cameron. And then my next subscriber is Tosan in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Sarah in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Brooke in the chat. Okay, let me turn the page. And then my next subscriber is Jake in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Autumn in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Robel in the chat. And then my next subscriber is David in the chat. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Isla in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Deeptika in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Mitch in the chat. And then we have is Scarlett. Thank you, Scarlett, for subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Tamin in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Ahoja in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Chloe in the chat. Thank you so much for liking my stream. And then next subscriber we have is Jensen in the chat. Thank you. And then the next subscriber is Damien in the chat. Thank you, Damien. And then the next subscriber we have is Yuvan. And then the next subscriber that I have is Zoe in the chat. Thank you, Zoe. And then the next subscriber is Shalini in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Damien with a star. Here you go. And then the next subscriber is Essence in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Tom in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Mackenzie in the chat. And then the next subscriber I have is Sarah in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Lechu in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Yun Shay. And then the next subscriber we have is Laura in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Kai in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Shazab in the chat. And then the next subscriber is Jerry in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Hisnia in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Sophia in the chat. Thank you, Sophia, for liking and subscribing. And then the next subscriber I have is Michelle in the chat. Thank you, Michelle. And then the next subscriber I have is Isla in the chat. And then the next subscriber I have is Sophia in the chat. And then the next subscriber I have is Lema in the chat. And then the next subscriber I've got is Megan in the chat. And then the next subscriber after Megan we have is Mina in the chat. Thank you, Mina, for liking and subscribing. And then the next subscriber we have is Dairo. And then the next subscriber we've got is Dane. And then the next subscriber is Zach in the chat. Thank you. And then the next subscriber we have is Daniela. And then the next subscriber we have is Katsia. And then the next subscriber we've got is Zachary. And then the next subscriber we have is Shazab. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ade. And then the next subscriber we've got is Jade. And then the next subscriber we've got is Raylan. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ali in the chat. And then the next subscriber we've got is Jit May. And then the next subscriber we've got is Aiden. And then the next subscriber we've got is Mayla. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ariana. And then the next subscriber we have is Lola in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Lyra in the chat. And then the next subscriber we've got is Safe. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ira in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Angel in the chat. And then the next subscriber we've got is Koa in the chat. And then the next subscriber that we have is Ira in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Ellie in the chat. Thank you, Ellie, for liking and subscribing. And then the next subscriber we've got is Remad. And then the next subscriber we have is Nicole in the chat. And then the next subscriber we've got is Dulce in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Nick in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Lekuman. And then the next subscriber we have is Otis. And then the next subscriber we have is Amina. And then the next subscriber we have is Jalacia. And then the next subscriber we have is Noah. And then the next subscriber we have is Kelsey. And then the next subscriber we have is Amelia. And then the next subscriber we have is Brody. And then the next subscriber we have is Jalen. And then the next subscriber we have is Leila in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Tommy. And then the next subscriber we have is Ali. And then the next subscriber we have is Callum. And then the next subscriber we have is Kalsama. And then the next subscriber we have is Fabian. And then the next subscriber we have is Ruthie. And then the next subscriber we have is George. And then the next subscriber we have is Adam. And then the next subscriber we have is Kim. And then the next subscriber we have is Stefan. And then the next subscriber we have is Tricia. And then the next subscriber we have is Mario. And then the next subscriber we have is Yusuf. And then the next subscriber we have is Alex. And then the next subscriber we have is Chloe. And then the next subscriber we've got is Zola. And then the next subscriber we've got is Diago. And then the next subscriber we have is Nadia. And then the next subscriber we have is Sergio. Let's turn the page, guys. And then the next subscriber we have is Lucas. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ismail. And then the next subscriber we have is Shazib. And then the next subscriber we have is Lakshi. And then the next subscriber we have is Adeline. And then the next subscriber we have is Kevin. And then the next subscriber we have is Kinley. And then the next subscriber we have is Jackson. And then the next subscriber we have is Natalia. And then the next subscriber we have is Joy. And then the next subscriber we have is Zaini. And then the next subscriber we've got is Marsha. And then the next subscriber we've got is Sam. And then the next subscriber we've got is Hayla in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Tracy. And then the next subscriber we have is Joshua. And then the next subscriber we have is Henry. And then the next subscriber we have is Yusuf. And then the next subscriber we have is Evelyn. And then the next subscriber we have is Gracie. And then the next subscriber we have is Philip. And then the next subscriber we have is Medina. And then the next subscriber we have is Lewis. And then the next subscriber we've got is Maricula. And then the next subscriber we've got is Uzman. And then the next subscriber we have is Saima. And then the next subscriber we have is Tommy. And then the next subscriber we've got is Dejane. And then the next subscriber we have is Scarlett. And then the next subscriber we have is Dionur. And then the next subscriber is Lil's DK. And then the next subscriber is Yosa. And then the next subscriber is Vilena. Welcome back, Vilena. And then the next subscriber is Osman. And then the next subscriber is Sumira. And then the next subscriber is Dio. And then the next subscriber is Lena. And then my next subscriber is Ibrahim. And then my next subscriber is Ali in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Jonathan. And then my next subscriber is Zarina. And then I have Rukaya. Thank you for subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Archie. And then my next subscriber is Vilena. And then my next subscriber is Faisal. And then my next subscriber is Ashanti. And then my next subscriber is Shazi. And then my next subscriber is Syra. And then my next subscriber is Buzz. And then my next subscriber is Ayad. And then my next subscriber is Ella. And then my next subscriber is Salah. And then my next subscriber is Bella. And then my next subscriber is Chester. And then my next subscriber is Ella. And then my next subscriber is Violet. And then my next subscriber is Eva. And then my next subscriber is Jalen. And then my next subscriber is Owen. And then my next subscriber is Uzair. And then my next subscriber is Phobe. And then my next subscriber is Darren. And then my next subscriber is Mia in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Essen. And then my next subscriber is Ella Rose. And then my next subscriber is Zane. And then my next subscriber is Light Tint. And then my next subscriber is Seth. Welcome back. And then my next subscriber is Axel. And then my next subscriber is Ultra. And then my next subscriber is Ashley. And then my next subscriber is Leno. And then my next subscriber is Mia Sophia. And then my next subscriber is Betty. And then my next subscriber is Jade. And then my next subscriber is Sophia. And then my next subscriber is Ismail. And then my next subscriber is King One. And then my next subscriber is Dilnor. And then my next subscriber is Beckett. And then my next subscriber is Dejo. And then my next subscriber is Betty. And then my next subscriber is Neva. And then my next subscriber is Shazy. And then my next subscriber is Jules. And then my next subscriber is Amanda. And then my next subscriber is Janae. Thank you so much, guys. I will be taking a break now. And I'll be back like within, I guess, 45 minutes. Take care of yourself. I love you all.